Good evening, and hello. My name is Rachel Amponsah, and I'm the former video editor here at Technician. And tonight, I sit down to talk to Melanie Flowers, the 75th Student Body President here at NC State University, as she talks about her term and time here as the Student Body President, and the ups and downs, the triumphs, the lows, and all the things she has to persevere against throughout this two last semesters. From the global pandemic, to online classes, to even racial tensions here on campus, she takes us to an in-depth conversation about how it was like to be the first African American female student body president here at NC State.
I'm a senior studying communication with a concentration in public relations. I am originally from Montclair, New Jersey, and my family moved to Cary, North Carolina right before I started high school, so I've been in North Carolina for almost 8 complete years, which is absolutely nuts. I was really involved in the performing arts in high school, and then after high school I went to Western Carolina University for my freshman year, and I got involved in Student Government Association while I was over there. I also marched in their band as part of the color guard, and then I transferred to NC State to start off my sophomore year of college, and that year I got involved in student government and a few other clubs on campus, and then my junior year I was involved in the Inter-Residence Council, and I ran for student body president my junior year with Mackenzie Heflin as my vice president, who's now student body president, and we won our election, and then we hit what was 2020. So, I mean, everyone knows that story. That's a little bit about me.
Going off of what you said, like about being an out-of-state student, I did watch this debate that just happened. Well, it didn't just happen, back in February, about being knowing the out-of-state students. So what was it like being, not originally from North Carolina, but you've been here a while, kind of thing, and being president? Could you relate to them more?
It's interesting. That wasn't a scope that really came to light too much this year. Obviously, out-of-state students had very unique challenge when it came to COVID-19 because a lot of our services couldn't cross state lines, like our mental health services. You couldn't go to NC State Counseling Center if you didn't live in North Carolina. So there were those experiences, and I tried to make myself as aware as possible about all of those unique concerns, and allow the university to still provide resources for those students in the capacity that we could. But as far as being from New Jersey originally and that coming into play as student body president, I don't think it did too much, but that I think it's just a symptom of all that's happened this year.
Talk to me about your time as student body president and leading up to this point. I guess the whole shebang from election to now.
The whole story.
Well, you don't have to you can summarize it.
All right, I'll do my best. So Mackenzie and I got elected on, I want to say March 6th. No, it was March 6th that we got elected, and then March 7th is NC State's birthday, and then March 11th, the World Health Organization said that COVID-19 was a global pandemic. We were in spring break, and I think around those couple days was when the university said we're going to extend spring break, and then, as everyone knows, eventually the university had to completely shift to a virtual format, and so the entire UNC system sent everyone home, and that was Mackenzie and I's onboarding into our roles as leaders of the student body. It was definitely stressful because we were onboarding and students were in need of so much because we were doing things for the first time. Our administration was doing things for the first time. The chancellor was, and students certainly were as well. And so things like emergency housing, emergency food, virtual classes in the libraries, getting students, Wi-Fi access and technology and all those other resources that they typically have access to on campus. Definitely stressful and challenging because you want to make sure that everybody has what they need, but for the first time, not everybody had NC State as their foundation of a resource. People were sent to different home lives, and it was hard for a lot of students, and so we did our best to kind of make the laundry list of things that students needed, and met with administration to see what we could do to still pull off NC State being NC State virtually. In the beginning of COVID-19, I mean, definitely still now, the Asian American community was getting a lot of violence towards them because the past administration of our national government had referred to COVID-19 as the Chinese virus. And there were stabbings going on across the country, and at NC State there was an act of ignorance or racism for students who lived off campus, and their decorations were pulled down that were traditional Asian decorations. And it was really scary for me because I wasn't sure if that action was the beginning of something more violent or more threatening for those students. A full investigation went on, and they had, security until they could resolve the issue and confirm that there was no threat to their lives. But it was really scary to see that ignorance on campus. And so that was one of the first-ish events that happened. And then there was the first, I don't want to say the first protest on campus, but one of the first ones on campus for the Black Lives Matter movement. PAC United group had several protests over the summer as well, and so there was a lot of activism on campus, which was great. And leaders from student government were always in attendance supporting the students who were wanting to speak out, because they were speaking out for our students, and that's what we want to do as well. So I guess before we hit the protests, we had the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor surface. Obviously they'd happened not when the world found out about them, but they received the spotlight. And but I know that the NC State community was watching in terror of all of those deaths. And and I hate to say this because the conversation's been needed and it's been happening, just not in the way it has this past year. But it did spark a conversation and discussions and action. And Nubian Message and several Black student organizations on campus put forth 2 petitions that I got to be a part of forming, and that went up to administration, to Chancellor Woodson, Sherry Schwab, I think she's the vice provost. She might be a vice chancellor. No, he's the vice provost. The Office of Institutional Equity and Diversity, attended a lot of meetings, the provost, just a lot of really important people who have the power to implement some of the things that students were begging for and that students have been advocating for years. One of them was the cultural competency training that students received this past spring. SG's been fighting for that for so long. I was a sophomore in student government asking for that. And NC State needed it then, and we needed it now. And even before then. But those meetings were really, really hard. I remember going to one, and a student started crying. And it was just awful to see Black students having to work so hard over the summer to be seen and heard and receive the resources that they deserve, because they're students at NC State, and NC State, we do the best for our students, and students deserve the absolute best, and Black students haven't always gotten that. And I mean, neither has the full NC State community, because I think when NC State talks about producing students that are going to go out into the world and really change things, that means that every student of every ethnicity and background needs to be able to go and treat people that don't share their identities with respect and care and all of that. That brings us to kind of Title IX. That happened alongside that. Betsy DeVos, the previous Secretary of Education, published the Title IX policy that didn't seem to, in student government's opinion, take into account any of the heavy criticisms that were put on the proposed changes that came out in December of 2018 that student government was formally opposed to then. And I was in student government when we had town halls and submitted formal comments to oppose the proposed changes then. And the policy came out, and it was essentially what was proposed. And so student government, we put out a statement. Legislation was passed to make sure that at NC State, we set our ceilings and floors when it came to that policy, so that our survivors could still receive the care they deserve, and we could take advantage of the unsaid things in the policy is the easiest way to put it, because I could spend, a whole nother interview talking about that. And so we work with the Women's Center, with OID, administration, other leaders on campus, etc., to address that. That gets us to the federal government putting out executive orders to force universities to reopen, or funding for universities would be pulled. And we're public universities, so that was really scary. And that might have not been July, but it was over the summer. And so that was really frustrating, because obviously we're a school of 37,000 students. NC State cannot fully reopen and be safe. It's not going to work for us. I think there's some smaller schools who probably could have operated under that executive order, but not NC State. Not Arizona State University. It just wouldn't have worked. And so there were some times where I kind of felt like I was in limbo, and student government was in limbo, and student leadership and advocacy was in limbo, because decisions were obviously being made not only several steps above my head at the university, but in our country. And it was just threatening. And other executive orders that got put out or like revoking visa policies or changing them to make it harder for our international students to come to campus and attend. And if they were going to attend class, they would have to attend classes in person, which was just insane and threatening to their safety. And so, like, how do we fix that? And obviously, well, not obviously, but that executive order ended up being revoked. But, you know, for the few days that it was in place, admin were trying to work to figure out how to keep our international students on campus in a safe way and compliant with the federal government. And so there was just a lot going on.
Do you think, like, NC State wasn't really they were too much thinking about money and as well as, like, the curriculum rather than their students? Because I know, like, for instance, you know, last year, I wasn't here when everybody left after spring break, but I was abroad. And they did not give me a lot of time. Yeah. They said, you got to get back this day. And I was like, I got to find a flight, man. Yeah. Like, or, like, there's consequences. So, you know, do you think they don't kind of put their students first as they should? Like, from your experience, as your point of view, because you really got to see this firsthand while, you know, we as students have been frustrated this past, year and a half. But, like, from your perspective, do you think NC State's hasn't been doing as well as a job as they should as putting their students, as well as their students, you know, well-being first when it comes to, like, this pandemic?
You brought up finances. Housing would have received more money had students stayed, so it certainly was not a financial decision. This put the university in a worse financial position than we were previously. It really was about maintaining students' physical health. If you recall over the summer, I think in April or May, I think they were saying, like, the summer is going to kill COVID-19. It's going to get super hot, and we're going to get back to normal, and things are going to be fine by the fall semester. And things certainly weren't, and we were still on the rise with COVID-19 cases in a way that was just really scary, and deaths were rising in our country. And so really the vast and staunch decisions to close us down were, we need to make sure that our students are living first and foremost.
It's a good thing to have.
It is a good thing to have. Oh, so you think, like, maybe everybody was just as confused with all of this going on, you know what I mean? Because this is all new. No one knows what's going on. Because I know exactly what you mean. Like, when summer hits, the heat will kill it. Like, you know, heat kills a lot of things. And, like, but that wasn't the case. Because, you know, that was the whole reason everybody was coming up with these theories. Like, oh, in Africa, they don't got COVID because of the heat. As somebody who has, like, family there, that's a lie. Yeah. So, throughout that summer semester, especially in those days coming up, do you think the university, you know, they did a pretty good job of handling the situation, or were they just as confused as everyone else? Because I know this was new for everyone.
It's a good question, and I think it's what I'm going to continue asking myself as I, like, am able to reflect more on this year. But it's really interesting because we changed a lot from fall semester to spring semester, but I don't know, like, not that much change with our plans. We obviously became a lot more strict, and we went from double occupancy housing to single occupancy, and even more classes were online, and our student code of conduct became I guess, amended with COVID-19 rules for our students to follow, so that way we could hold students accountable better. But we pulled it off this semester, and we should have been able to in the fall. I don't know if we had educated students the way we thought we had about how seriously to take COVID-19. And I also think that we should have been, I think the university could have been a little bit more honest about the threats of coming back to campus to the NC State community, because it's like, on one hand, you don't want to tell students, you know, like, coming back to school you could get sick. You can't tell students that, like, they're not going to come. And we believe that we were in a position where, sorry, this is like a very long answer to tell me about the year, but it's been a dense year.
It has. I understand completely. I mean, we all do. This has been one, as I've told them many times, it's been a hell of a year. And, like, in your position, like, I can't imagine how much more like, in a whole you have to do on top of being a student, on top of graduating, on top of being a senior, on top of being a black woman, on top of being a black student, like, at a predominantly white institute. Like, I know I'm jumping back, but now, since I'm talking about you being, like, you know, you're the first black female student body president. I feel like this year has been a historic year for that, and then also, like, I myself am the first black female video editor at Technician, so we're just, like, taking over. So do you feel like you have just, you know, you set an influence, you set a stage for future black women to be, like, in these positions of kind of, like, yeah, power. Let's do that. Because, you know, we also have Kamala Harris as our vice president. She's the first black and, South Asian. I want to get that correct. South Asian woman as vice president. And she's the first woman vice president. Yeah. So, like, you know, woman, we're taking over it. But do you feel like, you know, you set this, like, you've laid out the ground for women who are feeling like, especially, like, I know, especially women of color that are feeling like, oh, we can't be in these powers of position because this is a white institute, you know, kind of thing. So do you feel like you've made that impact at state as your time here?
I know that people who have come before me have done that for me to exist in this office. I'm the 10th elected student body I'm the 10th black elected student body president. And I think I'm the 9th or 10th woman to serve as student body president out of 100. And Kevin Howell was the first black student body president. He's still at the university. He hasn't been here since he was a student, but it's like if he wasn't president, then I wouldn't get to be president right now. And he served in 1888 to 1889. Oh my gosh. 1988 to 1989. He obviously, like, paved the ground, I think, for black leaders on this campus in a lot of ways, and he experienced things that I will never experience because he was the first. In the 99th session, student government had its first black female student body vice president, Nicole Teague, and, like, I think that's a big part of why I'm able to serve in this office, because as awful as it is to say, my ability to be elected as student body president is dependent on my palatability to UNC State's white community, and I become more palatable because there are more black people who have, like, throughout our years served in leadership positions, and so I think I'm very grateful and appreciative for all of those people that I named and, like, so many others, because I could name everyone, but I'm not going to. And Kathy Sterling was our first female student body president, and she served in our 50th session in 1970, and, like, if she did not serve in 1970, who knows if I'd be able to serve in 2020. And I hope that I am now a part of them, and that I have created more space for black female leaders and just diverse leaders on this campus. Student government still has so many firsts to have in our leadership positions, and I know other student organizations on campus share that same issue of needing diverse leaders to serve as leaders. And I mean, all of NC State needs more diversity. Yeah. So I can't say that I know I've opened up more opportunity for black women and diverse students on campus, but that's my hope, and I can say I know that that's been done for me in the past.
You might not feel it now, but I'm sure down the road, maybe in a few years, somebody's going to be doing this same interview and going to be like, you know, if Melanie Flowers wasn't president, I don't know if I would be here. Just like how you were mentioning all those wonderful people that helped you get to where you are now.
There is one other person I do want to name, though. Go ahead. Jackie Gonzalez was student body president during what was my first year at NC State, but I was at Western. And that year, American University in D.C. had its first black female student body president. And when she got elected, there were nooses hung around campus with bananas in them. And she sued the university and won her case, which we love for her. But Jackie wrote a statement in solidarity with her experience, and I reached out to that student body president, and I didn't know about that statement until I was already in office, but I read it, and I was like, oh my goodness, like, Jackie was making space for the first black female student body president to serve at NC State by just speaking out against that and making sure that, you know, student government in the 97th session was taking on that opinion. And it was a powerful feeling to have when I read it. I was like, oh my gosh, like, wow, I have, like, huge shoes to fill.
Yeah. You were president during a time, well, it's still going on. I mean, was it last week alone? Was it last week? Yeah, it was last week, literally, when the George Floyd, trial came to an end. And for the first time, at least, that I've seen in a long time, that Black people felt that they got the justice, that we deserve. And that, because in the past, there's been acquittals, there's been mistrials, and it just feels like it was a pattern. But this one made it feel like it was different. It was definitely a historical moment for the Black community. Yeah. We're both Black females at a predominantly white institution, and I'm sure we both, well, I know I've experienced rather racist, time periods, racist moments on campus. And I don't know, I can't speak for you, but I'm sure you've seen it, because it's unavoidable. We're a very small community here at State.
We are.
And we're only getting smaller because at the time, people don't feel safe. Because I've been to those those little student council meetings or town halls that we've had, and we talked about this, because it's sad, it's troubling. It makes people feel like, because mine was just the first few weeks of being at State, and, it still continues to this day. And I just felt like, oh, I wish I went to Howard. And I'm sure, because I did say that. Because a lot of people are just like, a lot of Black students that I've talked to feel the same way I felt, that, I wish I would have gone to an HBCU where I would have felt more accepted rather than coming to State. And I feel like you personally have probably heard from students, have seen it firsthand, especially with the Black Lives Matter movement that started, while we were in quarantine back in, May? And it's still going on to this day. I mean, only a couple hours away, we had our own incident where a Black man got shot 5 times by police. And, we're still having protests. From you, just as, a student, not even as president, how has it felt? How has that impacted your time, not only as State, but your time serving on this council?
And you said, not to tie it with being student body president, but it's almost, hard to, in a weird way, separate my Blackness from being student body president this past year. I guess I'll call it the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. I was in high school with Trayvon Martin's death, and I barely comprehended what was going on, and that was at a time where obviously we had iPhones and technology and social media, but things weren't spreading the way they did this year. I think it was nerve-wracking to see so many cases back to back to back, and it's awful to say, but if they hadn't been back to back to back, and if we hadn't all been at home with nothing else to look at or do with their time, they wouldn't have gotten the attention that they needed for justice to have been served. And I mean, obviously, Breonna Taylor didn't get that. But George Floyd was fortunate enough to, and Ahmaud Arbery's coming up in May, but it sucked. I mean, I remember going downtown almost every day for a couple weeks in June. And I was at that first protest for George Floyd's death, and I mean, Raleigh was pissed off. And it was almost a feeling of togetherness in seeing so many people just so upset at what had happened in the world. Because I don't know if I just wasn't expecting to see the crowds that, we had seen in other cities in the United States, but it was cool. And I went home, and it was 1 a.m, but I was going through Instagram, and Technician had reached out to me saying they wanted a quote. But, I saw that so many other students from NC State that I didn't even know were at the protest downtown with me. And so that was a really great feeling of community, I think, because despite the awful events that had brought us together in that way, it was really great to see that NC State does have a lot of allies in the community that want to fight for what's right and are willing to do so. But I mean, the other part of being Black and the leader is you're pulling double duty. And I'm somebody who firmly believes that it's not every Black person's responsibility to fight for their community, because not everyone has to do that. But I'm also somebody who believes that if you decide it's going to be your job, like, it better be your job unforgivably. And I think I've decided for me, like, as a leader and just as a person, it has to be mine. Like, I didn't see an option in not going to a protest or not writing a statement or not correcting somebody in a meeting or not meeting with administration or not speaking up, etc. And it was really heavy work, and there's a lot of support at NC State, but, like, you're only going to get so many, like, how are you doing? Like, things have been really hard for you. You're like, it's been such a year already. Yeah. Like, you get that all the time, and I got it all the time, and it was great because I know it's coming from a supportive place, but at the same time, like shit sucks. Like, you're not going to change it. And like, talking about it, change it. Yeah, like, talking about it's not going to bring anybody's life back. Like, it's not going to make the students who are racist less racist. Like, it sucks to suck right now, but, like, I'm here for a reason, and I'm just trying my best to make sure that I'm going to do a decent job in this role. So, I guess it's, like, a little bit of me answering that question. I think, yeah.
I think it was a good answer because I can totally relate because I'm in a, like, I'm now leaving my leadership role at State as a graduate and move on to the next editor. And, and I completely agree because if you're going to stand up for a cause, you got to do it wholeheartedly. You got to do it, like, whenever something comes up, you got to address it. And so I made sure to address it. I mean, they know. So I, like, from the start, because I told them I can't sit here as, like, I'm a black woman. I can't sit here and be quiet about it. Yeah. And I'm not going to pretend to be quiet about it, to my team. If I feel like this is something that needs to be covered, this is something that needs to be talked about. I mean, it's been going on, like you said, all the way back to Trayvon Martin. But it didn't get as much, it got attention. But like you said, I think if it wasn't for us just being at home, it wouldn't have gotten the momentum we've really seen in the last year alone. In the last few months, it hasn't even been a year. And it's unfortunate that we've seen these cases back to back to back because it feels like 1 week it's someone and the next it's someone else. And I don't know what's going on in this country because then I got, another news article my sister sent me that someone else has been shot. And it's just like, I don't know what's happening. While we had this momentum, it feels at the same time, it's like we win, but then we lose at the same time. And it's not something that anyone should be quiet about. But, if you want to be quiet about it, that's you. That's you. I'm not going to judge you. Yeah. But I feel like, we've definitely, like, okay, this goes into my next question, because I was thinking about it while you were, like, responding. So, if you recall, at the end of 2019, back in November, I think there was that turning point, cultural war, thank you, Chloe, that happened at NC State. And, obviously, I'm not going to lie, I was in the protest because, personally, as a black student who's already experienced the racism I've experienced just my first year alone, and I just felt like this, to me, was a slap in my face. And so many students, not only students of color, felt the same way. So how do you think, like, from your point of view, because you've been talking to the administrators, you've been talking to these people that, maybe even plan these events, I'm not sure. But how do you feel like we've grown as, like, how has the university grown as from, hosting these culture wars to, like, supporting the Black Lives Matter movement and, standing up for, against Asian hate, all of that, like, supporting the minorities on campus. Like, thinking back to, from 2019 when they were basically slapping us in the face with this.
Yeah. I do remember 2019 and I was at that protest too. So Turning Point USA's student chapter on campus brought them to campus, and I know that there were some student leaders on campus at that time who were like, what do we do? I know that the student leaders had conversations with administration following the event, almost saying, like, look what's been done, because students were in uproar that night. I mean, I was at the protest until it disbanded later on, but I think the university's become more outspoken than we've ever been.
Yeah.
And I'm proud of that, and at the same time, so is the entire world. Everyone's outspoken this year, and it's like, you know, if you're not going to be outspoken, you're not a good person anymore. And I think I'm so glad that we're moving forward, and it's just like, we're a little late, NC State. We're very late at speaking out against these things that hurt the communities of our students. But I think it's a step forward, and I'm glad that at least on paper you can look at NC State and you can say this is what NC State believes in, this is what the university believes in, because I think there was a lot left for interpretation previous to this year, because I think we've just gotten statements that are more intended to be politically correct than to really take a stance against something that's hurting people.
Yeah, and so do you think that if it comes to pass, you think NC State would allow these like turning points to bring these type of people to campus again? Or do you think they've learned from their mistake? This is just your personal opinion.
Yeah, I mean, this is also like the weird hat that I wear, because I know legally NC State probably couldn't have prevented them from coming to campus because it was a student organization. And I know that if we had tried to, or if the university had tried to bar the student org from bringing them to campus, there would have been lawsuits. And I mean, from what I've seen at other schools in similar situations, like the universities usually lose and they end up paying the people they didn't want to come in the first place, or didn't want to be part of their school in the first place. I do think, however, other parts of the university would have been more prepared to address the harm that would have been created with an event like that. This year, the counseling center has taken a ginormous step, and anytime something has happened, I think they've been the first to say, hey, we have a community space here for you, and they've collaborated a lot with the community center. So I know the AACC has done a phenomenal job providing space for Black students this year, and so has MSA and the Women's Center. What am I saying? And the WT Center. And so I think in the community spaces, I've also seen a lot of growth, and I think we're not going to be afraid to be proactive in making sure that students are taken care of. When we know something is going to make them upset, we're going to try to take care of them as much as we can.
See, and I feel like it's important as students. I felt like maybe state should have released something addressing that culture war, because it just felt like, I know I had to leave the protest early. And when you're walking, I had to walk back to like Witherspoon to where I was meeting up. I think it was my mom or my sister.
Yeah.
And you're walking and you see people just like with Trump flags, and they're looking at you with disgust. It is scary, because I was just alone out there. Yeah. And you're just like, what if I get attacked? I had my pepper spray on lock. I was just like, oh my gosh. And it's a scary situation. And then, you recall the videos and incidents that took place throughout those times. And just people mocking the protesters and all that. Yeah. And to this day, Technician still gets comments from these people on our little, the protesters versus, the attendees. People still being insulting these protesters. But I'm not gonna lie, it's vice versa too. But it's more of the insults towards the protesters. Right. And, I just felt like as a student, state should have said something we couldn't help it or something. I know they probably couldn't, but something would have reassured. Because even me, I was just like, dang, I'm glad, this semester's almost over. I'm glad. When I would joke around when I went abroad, when they're like, why'd you come here? I was like, I need to get away from the U.S. because it's ridiculous. Yeah. So
I definitely do wish it was more known that, this was not the university endorsing the people who were coming to speak at the university, because it definitely comes off as that for an event that's that large, that's taking place in Tally Student Union. Mm-hmm. It seems like it's NC State bringing these people to campus. I didn't feel particularly amazing on that evening. I left the office for IRC and then went to my apartment, got changed, and came out with warm clothes to protest. I think that despite all the challenges the university still has in its path and journey moving forward to educate every student who walks these halls, we're still making a lot of progress, and there's always going to be a lot of work to do, but I think we've got a North Star that's continuing to move towards like a true pinnacle of social justice, and that's something I'm really proud of. I will say the positive things I have to talk about are probably graduation and student health services doing a great job this year. My favorite SG memory probably has to do with like addressing food and housing insecurity with everyone.
Oh, wow.
Or like, I don't know. Planning the protest was really hard, but it was really fun to plan it with like my 4 best work friends.
So tell us about, planning that whole event as well as the protest and the whole Seagraves situation.
So Chadwick Seagraves' like reputation on social media came to light for me on the last day of classes, or the last day of class for the fall semester, and so immediately I contacted Chief House and the administration, Chancellor Woodson, his chief of staff. I think also Sherry Schwab from OIAD and probably a few others got looped in that day about, this person that's on our campus that's working and who has previously worked with students in a more student-facing role with the libraries. And so that solicited an investigation with, oh my God, shoot. I forget what the name of the investigation is called, but that solicited an investigation to begin, and so he didn't have access to like his work accounts and had to leave the university, and our police department and the state got involved in looking into Chadwick Seagraves and his affiliations, his actions, and what he may or may not have done with school information, with university information, student intel, and with NC State resources. So that was November 2020, and I didn't really hear anything until everyone else did in January when the results came back from that investigation, and NC State couldn't prove that he had done anything that was a legally fireable offense, and so that was really hard. And obviously students were in outcry, and I just saw it on social media, and I didn't see it on campus because we weren't back yet, but you could tell there was just a lot of anger. And I know for me it was kind of something that hung over my head all of winter break, and winter break was 54 days or something like that, and all I was thinking about was like, is this case going to come back the way it needs to? Like, is he going to be gone? Because I really need him to not come back to campus. And that wasn't the result. And so I've had the experience of leading protests before, and I felt like that was the time that student government could really be instrumental in making sure that students weren't wasting our voices that we have, because we can say more than the university can in a lot of situations, like student government can. And so I messaged my lovely and amazing student body officers and said, hey, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? And immediately they were supportive and asking me what I needed from them. And granted, like, school isn't even back in session yet. Student government is still like on this weird break-ish thing. We don't really stop working in SG, but in a matter of 96 hours, 4 days, we planned the protest. We called it the freeze out. There was actually a lot of symbolism there, because it happened the day after MLK Day, and we wanted to obviously freeze Chadwick Seagraves out of the university, but Martin Luther King was a brother of Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, and they do all of the ice cold stuff in December, and so that was kind of paying homage to that legacy. And then we established the protest through executive order that I put out, and we had the plan to write letters to Chadwick Seagraves, which I did mail all of them to him, and the letters were to encourage him to resign, or demand that he resign rather, because he has no place at NC State. He's not going to be a employee who can bring anything to NC State anymore. Like, with his reputation and with the actions that he's made, there's nothing that he can do, I think, to walk in the door at 9 o'clock in the morning and be productive. Like, it's just not going to be what happens. Like, I couldn't imagine that man's email or inbox. And students do not deserve to go to university where he works. They don't deserve to feel like there's a Proud Boy on their campus. And so the protest happened. And this was a lot lower than I think expected because we were getting a lot of engagement online, but it was the first day of class, most students weren't on campus, etc. But I was really grateful for the students that were in attendance and supporting it and supporting student government in our, I'll call it activism. And, we got local media out there to cover this story to get it the attention that it needed on a bigger scale, so that way we could make sure that we're making some noise and NC State knows how students feel and we're not being quiet about anything. There's also a virtual protest option for students. And we ended at the free expression tunnel with students being able to paint their hand and put their print on the wall, which was prepared for Respect the Pack, which is happening later in the first week of class for the spring semester.
Y'all playing that fast. Wow, I didn't know it stretched back to November. I heard about it in January.
Yeah. Because that's when it surfaced in November, but students were at the end of their semester, so I think a lot of students, we weren't on campus together, and it was in the back roads of Twitter. So.
Yeah. We could go on and on about the hell of year you've had. I get it. You've had COVID. You've had hate at NC State. You had no hate at NC State as well. You had, all these racist incidents happening. You had election season. And I know election season was the most tiring season for me. I know that. So I can only imagine how it was for you. And you've had, we can't forget the inauguration, all the threats that were happening. You had the Seagraves case, tons of stuff. And yet, you're still standing. You've made it past all that. You made this year that would have been a difficult year for a lot of people. You made it your own. So is there any last, final words you would like to say?
I want to encourage students to keep, moving throughout the university with the integrity of caring for one another. And I hope that students continue to take actions and fight for what's right, within our NC State community and even beyond that. I think it's more important that they take what they learn here and use it, because I think, NC State's really a small city and there's so much to learn and there's so much space to grow. And I think NC State's a perfect place to become a servant to your community, because there's really so much to do and there's always going to be stuff to do. And so I'm encouraged by the tenacity of our student body and perseverance of our student body, and I look forward to seeing what this class of alumni end up doing, because I think there's nothing that can stop us.
Well, thank you for your time. We appreciate you, as well as all that you have done in this year alone. So thank you, Melanie. It was a pleasure talking to you and learning more about your experience as the first Black female student body president in the 2020-2021 school year.
Thank you. It was a good time. Go back.
Do y'all want to take a pic?
Oh, sure.
Jesus, Tolar.